I'm Nicole Johnston, and you're listening to 7am. Australia's tobacco wars are fueling violence, with fire bombings and arson attacks. Now the government wants to treat these organised crime syndicates like drug lords by going after them with wiretapping and seizing their assets. And the tobacconists are in trouble too, with calls to only sell cigarettes in supermarkets. Today, Criminologist Dr James Martin from Deakin University on how to rein in the multi-billion-dollar black market that's created a gangster's paradise. It's Wednesday, March 25. James, we've heard a lot about these so-called tobacco wars in recent years, shops being firebombed, extortion rackets, even murders linked to the trade. Why does black market tobacco produce that kind of violence?
Well, all illicit markets come with some, at least, risk of systemic violence. And so because these are markets that operate outside of the legal system, there's no recourse if things go wrong. So, for example, if you and I went and bought a car from a car dealer, and something was wrong with it, we could, go to small claims court. We'd have, things that we could do to get our money back. But in the drug dealing world, and most nicotine is now part of that world, if something goes wrong, then you use violence.
A sudden scramble as a gunman opens fire, shooting indiscriminately into a crowd of about a dozen outside an Altona North shisha cafe.
It's a really popular way to compete with your rivals. So, in a legal market, you might do that through price or, better advertising campaign. But in illegal markets, people can simply eliminate the competition by using violence against them.
Melbourne's tobacco war is taking its toll with 8 firebombing attacks in just 7 days.
Police and the Lunar Task Force have already been investigating more than 60 fires across Melbourne.
The most newsworthy violence, and one that I'm sure your listeners are familiar with, have been the arson attacks that have been, originally in Victoria, but have now increasingly spread across the country.
Emergency services were called to Good Street in Westmead, this is in Sydney, just before midnight, to find 2 vehicles engulfed in flames.
Kidnapping, torture, homicides.
1 a.m. in Glenroy, a gunman unleashes on a tobacco store.
Detectives revealing arsonists killed an innocent woman in a tragic case of mistaken identity.
We also see violence used to intimidate potential witnesses as well. So this is one of the problems, that to ramp up penalties and make the environment more hostile for criminal groups. You can increase the likelihood that they'll use violence against people who think they might, inform on them to police, for example.
So, James, is this illegal trade really one of the biggest black markets in the country? And what is the size of it?
Yeah, so it is, sadly now, it's absolutely massive. A majority of tobacco and nearly all the vaping products sold in Australia is now illicit. So we're looking at yearly expenditure, something in the order of around $7 billion, which is roughly 40% of our entire illicit drug economy. So nicotine is now worth more to criminals than cannabis, cocaine, heroin, and ecstasy combined. And sadly, it's nearly all of it is going into the hands of very serious organised criminal groups. So these are groups that are already involved in very dangerous criminal activities. Everything, the government has said, from trafficking of other illicit drugs, sex trafficking, human trafficking, cyber crimes. So the extraordinary profits of expenditure on these products is going directly into the pockets of those organisations. So some of the most dangerous people in the country.
And how did we actually get to this point? How did cigarettes become this major criminal enterprise?
Well, we started to see a real shift in government policy in the 2010s. So up until that point, price was used as a sort of nudging thing, increasing the price of cigarettes a little bit to try and get people who smoke to reconsider purchasing. But this shift implicitly went from, sending those smaller pricing signals to actually making cigarettes unaffordable. So someone who has a pack-a-day habit these days is looking at a yearly bill of around $15,000. And we know that smokers are disproportionately concentrated in disadvantaged populations who simply can't afford that. So it's a de facto form of prohibition.
This federal Labor government has been too slow and too weak and too soft in stopping the supply chains to this trade.
Small businesses are continuing to get ram-raided. Retail staff are worried about being assaulted.
We have criminal gangs running our streets in Melbourne, in Sydney, in Brisbane, because this government won't act.
So obviously this is becoming a major problem for the government. Why is it that it just can't get on top of it?
Well, I think the problem at the moment really stems from a lack of appreciation of what the limits of enforcement are in this space. So enforcement can work in illicit markets. So, that's everything from seizures at the border or even, beyond the border, working with international partners, all the way down through, to the retail level, trying to close stores and so on. You'll hear the government talking about seizures and raids, but those things actually don't produce any meaningful impacts on the market themselves. And that's because when a market gets beyond a certain point, while you can, severely impact or disrupt individual criminal networks, there are so many other players in the space that they don't interpret, some other rival being shut down as a deterrent. They see that as an invitation to expand their operations and take over greater market share. So I think as long as the government remains wedded to an enforcement-oriented solution like this, we're going to see these problems continue. I think the government, and actually many in the public health space as well, are really sort of trying to fight the last war all over again, thinking that the worst players in this space are the Western tobacco companies. But that's no longer the case. The worst players in this space, and those that actually have a dominant share of the market now, are criminal organisations. And at the moment, government policies actually play directly into their hands. Every tax increase, all the increasing restrictions we see on the legal sector actually strengthen the hand of the illicit sector. And that's the last thing I think we should be doing right now.
Coming up, is it time to ban tobacco shops altogether? James, you were in Canberra last week. There was this conference on the illicit trade in tobacco, and the federal government announced new plans to try and tackle it. What is it that they want to do?
So you're talking about the federal government basically doing more of the same. So expanding police powers, increasing penalties, more funding for law enforcement. A lot of these powers are similarly kind of in place. So, we have unexplained wealth powers, for example, that allows enforcement agencies to seize items that may have been accrued through, illicit market activity. The government has talked about ramping up wiretap powers, so, allowing illicit tobacco, for example, to be an offence that would trigger extra forms of police surveillance, but nothing really on the table, I think, that would fundamentally, change the environment that the police are working in such that they could actually get a handle on the market. But illicit drugs are really instructive in this regard. So over the last 15 years or so, we've tripled our drug law enforcement budget. And that was intended to make drugs harder to get. And those drugs that did hit the street because they were more scarce were supposed to be more expensive and more pure. We're seeing record levels of arrest, record volumes of seizures year on year. But when you actually look at the impact on the market, there's been no change in the availability of any of the illicit drug types. We're actually seeing purity increase and prices decline substantially.
Anyone who tried to deny that Australia has a massive problem with illegal tobacco is either deluded or lying. Cheap smokes are everywhere with a now ubiquitous, ridiculous retail distribution network.
And penalties for selling illicit tobacco are already really high. Here in Victoria, they're around maximum 15 years imprisonment. And we contrast that in the illicit drug space, the average sentence that a large-scale commercial drug trafficker gets is around 10 years. So, the penalties and the powers, I think, are largely in place, and I don't see much potential reform there that would really fundamentally alter the situation that we're in now.
Now, Australians will rightly think that any public official who stands up, whether a politician or a commissioner or a CEO or anyone in this room who stands up and talks tough about seizures, is not living in the real world unless and until the illegal retail shop fronts are shut down.
We had Julian Hill, the Assistant Minister for Customs, actually raise a question that was first posed by health groups, which is, should these standalone tobacco shops even exist? So how would a tobacco shop ban actually work?
I don't think it's actually even possible to do, because illicit operators, by definition, don't really care what the law is. And we actually saw an earlier kind of rerun of this when vape stores were shut down a few years ago. So, the government was concerned about vaping and decided that it wanted to shut down all the vape retailers. And so when the government banned all the vape stores, all they did was actually shut down all the legal stores, which gave all of the market share to the illicit stores. And I think we'd see a similar kind of thing here. We'd see black market adaptation. We'd see these 40,000 retailers, which is, an astounding number, simply rebrand. They would just take tobacconist off their sign, or they'd just continue to operate illegally.
And we also heard from Hill that those 40,000 tobacco stores are serving just 8% of the population. So it seems like a huge amount. Do we need that many?
No, I don't think we do. But unfortunately, the market doesn't really care what I think or what the minister thinks. These stores are the product of government policy. We have way more of them now than we did even a few years ago. And the reason for that is because government policies have made illicit tobacco such an attractive criminal commodity. So simply passing laws to try and get rid of those, because criminal players don't really care what the laws are, I think will be largely ineffective.
So what would be effective then? What would actually have an impact and finally end the tobacco wars?
So I think there are a few options that need to be considered. One of those is increased enforcement. We are going to require increased enforcement to take place. But again, illicit markets are very, very resistant to law enforcement when they're at the scale that they clearly are now with the illicit nicotine market. So what we need to do is try and use other measures to shrink the illicit market as much as possible. And there's two principal ways I think we can do that. One is to lower tobacco excise back to a point that you would get a critical mass of consumers shifting back to the legal market. And the other one would be to do what other countries around the world, like New Zealand or the UK, have done, and that is create a legal regulated market for vaping products and other less harmful nicotine products.
Smokers in England are being encouraged to take up vaping in a government-led initiative to get them to give up cigarettes.
So get people switching back to legal products and preferably less harmful nicotine products. And giving smokers somewhere to go. Both the UK and New Zealand, for example, have free switch to quit schemes where they give vapes for free to people who smoke to try and get them to quit. That shrinks the market, and therefore that enables law enforcement and regulatory agencies to have the best chance of success.
But isn't the government saying that there's actually no evidence that cutting the tobacco excise would make any difference?
Yeah, I think the government has said they haven't seen any evidence. I don't think that's the same as there being no evidence. It is true that some smokers, now that illicit tobacco is entrenched, widely available across the country, there are some smokers who just won't be prepared to pay a cent more for legal tobacco. But there are other customers that it's not like they're wedded to criminal activity, it's the magnitude of the price difference. So they might be prepared to pay $30 or $40 for a pack, but not $50, $60, $70 like we're seeing now. And so it's really trying to get those people who sit somewhere in the middle of that spectrum back to the legal market.
James, more broadly, what are the consequences, do you think, if we don't get this under control, especially because we're now seeing smoking rates looking set to increase for the first time since the 90s? Yeah,
that's right. So, that's an obvious consequence right there. No other Western country has seen anything like this. So that's obviously a very poor public health outcome. We're going to see, the increases in systemic violence as the illicit market share continues to grow. But I think we're looking down the barrel of one of the greatest public policy failures in living memory. There's hardly a metric that you could consider our current tobacco control policies a success. Increasing smoking rates, or at least early evidence thereof, increasing violence, billions and billions lost in excise, hundreds of millions extra dollars going into enforcement. Yeah, it's really failures all around at the moment, sadly.
James, thank you so much for talking to us about it.
Thanks, Nicole.
Also in the news, After 8 years of negotiations, Australia and the European Union have signed a free trade deal. Anthony Albanese and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced the $10 billion agreement yesterday. The PM says it will eliminate tariffs on exports like wine, seafood and horticulture, as well as give Australians access to EU beef, dairy, rice and sugar. And the company responsible for the $96 million Bureau of Meteorology website has scored a new government contract, despite being highly criticised for its redesign of the bomb site, which blew out by $90 million last year. It's now won a $16 million contract to build a climate data website for the government. I'm Nicole Johnston. This is 7am. Thanks for listening.